Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to go ahead and get started. This is going to be a monthly event that will take place during our lunch hour. And today we do have a hard stop at 1 p.m. I do want to let folks know that the next Q&A session will take place on Thursday, June 2nd from noon to 1 p.m. as well. We initiated this series as a way for folks to have more access to the department and to myself, who is the Assistant Executive Director who oversees the department's licensing and administration functions. Today, we're giving priority to folks who RSVP'd and submitted questions in advance. If we have time, we will be answering questions that are asked via the Zoom Q&A. If we don't get to your question today, we strongly encourage you to submit a question in advance for the next Q&A session. And then, of course, certain questions may make it to the department's FAQs. Thanks again for joining today. And we're going to go ahead and get started. Olivia, who is one of our comms folks, will be assisting in the Q&A. So Olivia, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jason. Our first question is from Richard E. Are NIEC zones allowed for non-volatile manufacturing, distribution, and non-storefront retail?
So the simple answer is no. NI stands for new industry, and then the EC stands for exposition corridor. So as part of the Q&A for the questions that were submitted in advance, I may toggle back and forth between some of the resources that are available on our website, as well as through other city websites. So one of the transitions will hopefully be taking us to American Legal, where our zoning information is stored. But within American Legal, we do have the section 105, which is where the location and land use related information is housed. Under 105.02, you'll see different commercial cannabis activities. The first one, of course, is going to be the retail commercial cannabis activity. But if we scroll down, we'll get to cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, testing. And within this section, it'll tell you what zones DCR can consider a prospective application. So the NIEC is not one of the specified zones, and it doesn't fall within one of the specified specific plan areas. So DCR at this time is not able to consider issuing a license for an NIEC zone property. Another thing we can look at is on the Department of City Planning's webpage, they have additional information as it relates to zoning, which may not be identified clearly in 105.02. Planning, of course, is responsible for the city's general plan, specific plans, the community plan areas that govern where commercial cannabis activity and other activities can be located within the city. They are working with stakeholders to update various plans. The NIEC falls within the Transit Neighborhood Plan corridor, and you can kind of see the specialized zoning that falls within this. As planning is going through and updating land use related items citywide, we are working with their leadership to try to determine how some of those changes will impact our licensing program. And we do anticipate that we will be jointly reporting back on how we can integrate some of their more recent changes into our section of the code. And I think I've hit all of the talking points on that question.
Great. The next question is from Katie P. Will the DCR consider allowing EMMDs to be permanently grandfathered in at their current location and remove the December 31st, 2025 deadline?
The city doesn't have any current plans to extend the limited grandfathering offered to existing medical marijuana dispensaries as part of phase one. The December 31st, 2025 deadline aligns with the state's annual license requirements, so extending that date may not be administratively feasible.
A question from Katie P. and Jake G. Can retail and cultivation licensees move outside their community plan area to another community plan area that has not reached undue concentration?
Not at this time.
A question from Fanny W., Andrea C., and Hamlet A. When will the licensing for retail reopen? And how many lottery winners will there be accepted for phase 3, round 2?
So DCR is going to be opening a new eligibility verification request period later this month. We have to administer that eligibility verification request period prior to administering the lottery process. At this time, we anticipate that approximately 125 application slots will be available through the lottery.
Question from Matt S. What permitting software do you use to track all commercial cannabis applications and licenses?
DCR uses the Excella Citizen Access Platform to track applications and licenses. Since Excella provides this platform to multiple jurisdictions, we commonly refer to it as the DCR licensing portal, and we contract with Excella for our application platform and associated system support.
Question from Jake G. What is the process to move a phase 2 license to another address? How long does this take to process?
If you're a licensee, which means you have temporary approval, you may submit a relocation modification request through the DCR licensing portal. An eligibility determination as to whether or not the proposed business location is compliant and eligible in accordance with 10502 will be made within 30 days of the date DCR is notified that applicable fees have been paid.
From Hugo M. Can a phase 2 and a phase 3 be in the same location?
Non-retail and non-storefront delivery licensees may be co-located on the same parcel, provided each licensee has their own distinct business premises location within that parcel.
From LJ, are there grants provided to start up a dispensary?
Not at this time. DCR currently has limited grant funding to provide fee waivers for eligibility verification requests, environmental review fees, and annual application fees.
From Stephen L. What is the status of being able to submit a premises location request? Will an applicant need to wait until they go through the annual license process at this juncture?
Only licensees, including businesses with temporary approval, may submit relocation requests. So if you do have temporary approval, you can submit a relocation request prior to going through the annual licensure process. If you have a pending application, if you are unable to move forward at that business premises address, it will result in the abandonment of that application, and you may be able to refile at a later date.
From Lance R. What are the current processing timelines for cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, and retail licenses?
Based on the recent amendments to the municipal code, processing times for all license types should take between 2 to 6 months. Processing times may take longer based on the completeness of the applicant's application, the ability to schedule an initial inspection, and whether or not the record requires an equity share review. Also based on recent amendments, applicants are able to submit modification requests within 60 days of submitting their temporary approval application. And if a modification request is submitted, it does pause processing of the application until the modification request is reviewed and/or approved or denied.
From Rashad E. Is a transportation-only license similar to a delivery license?
No, they're two distinct license types. The non-storefront delivery or delivery only license type allows a business to sell cannabis to consumers, whereas a distribution transport only license only allows the licensee to move cannabis between licensed commercial cannabis businesses.
From RB, is there assistance to help growers attain a building?
The department has various resources on its website to assist applicants and prospective applicants. However, the department doesn't provide any business advice as it relates to identifying a compliant building and or executing a lease for a compliant building.
Also from RB, is there a startup program to help individuals trying to launch a new business in this industry?
Yeah, as I mentioned, there's various resources on our website to assist applicants and prospective applicants. If you're a verified social equity individual applicant, you also have access to the department's business licensing and compliance assistance programming, which is available through various vendor webinars, as well as our learning management system.
From Kent C, how is the distance from a licensed location to a school or church measured? As the crow flies, even though there is a barrier making that route impossible, or the shortest possible pedestrian route?
So two things there. First, churches and other religious institutions are not considered sensitive uses. So their DCR doesn't even look at them. For the second piece is the distances between commercial cannabis businesses to either each other, if there's retail storefront with on-site sales, or between the business and a sensitive use is measured in a straight line, ignoring structures between the 2 points. So it would be as the crow flies, as the question was asked.
From Bryant M, will Proposition D arrests be recognized?
I'm assuming this is for the purposes of eligibility verification. No, pursuant to the municipal code, an arrest, prosecution, or conviction for a violation of Prop D is not considered a California arrest or cannabis conviction.
From Wadu M, what are the fees and costs of the application process?
So the fee table for various fees and services can be found in LEMC section 104.19. And I do have that up on one of the tabs, so bear with me as I toggle over. So under section 104.19, which is the fees and fines section of DCR's portion of the municipal code, you can see all of the various application and license filing fees, as well as environmental review fees, renewal fees. We've also got notices, all of the parts of our process that are kind of laid out soup to nuts, and the fees associated with those processes can be found under 104.19. And then all the way down here at the bottom, we do kind of have a catch-all for extraordinary services. And, that fee would be charged when there's the applicant or licensee needs DCR to do something that's not naturally contemplated within the code. And those are services or projects that may be associated with the execution of a court order, reviewing legal documents assigned to successors in the event of a death, having to do additional review to determine whether or not something is compliant or eligible under our code.
From Jesse F, is it possible for the PCN portal to reopen in the third quarter of 2022?
So we plan to reopen the PCN process later this year, of course, subject to any changes the mayor, council, or other elected officials may opt to either consider or approve between now and then. The plan is to reopen the PCN process after we finish processing the eligibility verification request, so that folks that get verified under the updated process do have the opportunity to participate in the PCN process. Currently, we plan for it to open sometime during Q4.
Also from Jesse F, have any community plans reached undue concentration with cultivation licenses?
Yes. And the reconciliation of our phase 2 records that have not been deemed filed yet may impact what that capacity looks like, and what capacity will be available to social equity applicants, either through the general application process or through the PCN application process. more information will be made available later on this year when we resume accepting cultivation applications that do include canopy. And then of course, as we get closer to opening the PCN process.
From Anthony B. I would like to know if I can walk into your office and receive the necessary documents for my lawyer to review documents.
So currently DCR's office is closed. So unfortunately, you can't just walk into the office at this time. However, application information, documents, and forms that have been submitted for an application or a licensing process are viewable through the DCR licensing portal by record contacts. And then of course, the documents and forms that DCR uses for the application and licensing processes are also available on the department's website. So you should have access to materials to provide to your lawyer.
From Makia G. Will the income used for verification for the round 3 lottery be based on 2016 or 2021 income?
DCR will be using income from either calendar year 2020 or from calendar year 2021 as the basis for determining low income for the next eligibility verification request round.
Also from Makia G, if a social equity applicant was awarded a retail license in round 2, is she eligible to participate in the lottery?
So the lottery is the selection process to identify which social equity individual applicants may submit a phase 3 retail round 2 application. So the lottery will identify and select people that are eligible to submit an application via phase 3 retail round 2.
From Mark P. What is the pathway from provisional license to the final one through CEQA?
So I may just be interpreting the question a little bit differently, but there's a kind of a couple of different steps. Is locally, businesses are issued temporary approval, which is the state equivalent of a provisional license. And you have to have temporary approval to be eligible to go through the local environmental review process. Folks that renewed and have a temporary approval license for 2022 received a communication from the department that gave them a letter that they can provide as proof to the state that they have made sufficient progress within the last 12 months and they're eligible to renew their state provisional license after July 1st of this year. Locally, once you've submitted your final project description and you've kind of locked in your location, the activities that you're going to do at the location and answered all of the associated questions, DCR is working with city planning's bench of environmental consultants to make a determination about whether or not your individual project qualifies for an exemption, or it needs to go through additional environmental review, which could include an initial study or an environmental impact report. Once you've completed the environmental review process at the local level, the business is then eligible to submit their annual application. And then we start to review documentation submitted to determine whether or not you have a complete application. Once we've determined that your annual application is complete, you'll be invoiced for associated annual application fees and notice and anything else required to fully navigate through to a decision as to whether or not an annual license will be issued. Based on conversations with the state, the state is looking for a local business to have fully navigated through our local annual licensure process and had your environmental review document deemed approved by the local jurisdiction, City of LA, prior to accepting your state annual application as being filed. So we, the city, took steps to decouple our process from the state's process last year to enable people to kind of navigate through our process independent from whatever was happening with other agencies, including the state, because based on the way it was originally designed, there was kind of trade-offs anticipated between our local jurisdiction and the state. And we anticipate that the state was going to be the lead agency based on things that they did last year. They've kind of identified the local jurisdiction as the lead agency. And unless you've gone through our annual process, you're not going to be able to meet their requirements to submit your full annual application process with them. So 2 different processes. If you have temporary approval, you're eligible to submit your final project description and go through the local environmental review. That's a prerequisite to submit your annual application. Then you have to navigate through our annual application process, and then the final decision maker will decide to either issue or deny an annual license. If you are issued an annual license and the environmental documents have been deemed approved, that would be the point at which the state has indicated that they feel that you meet the requirements for them for your state annual license application to be kind of further considered at the state level.
Also from Mark P on that topic, what is a reasonable timeline to expect for this process if it does not involve an EIR or initial study?
So the Form 4015 will be posted on DCR's website later this week. That is the final project description form. That's going to be the basis for which DCR and our consultant review your project. We anticipate that consultants will be brought on board based on geographic areas in early July, and then they're going to complete their review of projects in those geographic areas on a rolling basis from July going forward. Depending on how quickly you submit your final project description form and how quickly a consultant works on projects in that geographic area, will kind of determine how quickly we know whether or not your project qualifies for an exemption or it's going to require some higher level of environmental review. We anticipate that some businesses will get their environmental analysis completed in Q3. And then of course, others will get completed in Q4. And then basically projects will just be reviewed on a rolling basis. So if you get your project in, your final project description in before July, you'll most likely be assigned to a consultant sometime in Q3, and you'll either get your determination in Q3 or in Q4.
From Jane T, is the social equity program still thriving?
I think it's beginning to thrive. The city started from nothing, and 0% of our licensees when we started back in 2018 were considered social equity businesses. Through Q4 of last year, about 15 or 16% of our licensees were considered social equity businesses, and we're over 1/3 of our licenses are now considered or issued to social equity businesses. So I think the city has taken steps to prioritize the social equity program and making sure that opportunities are made available to social equity businesses. And we're going to continue to see social equity businesses making up a larger portion of the local market. So I think we're working towards social equity businesses thriving within our local market. And that has a lot to do with their prioritization. And then, continuing to work with those applicants and make additional resources available through the learning management system and business licensing and compliance training to hopefully move them through from being an applicant to being a licensee and being able to open their doors.
Also from Jane T, what are the requirements for the social equity program?
So there's individual requirements and then there's applicant requirements. So as an individual, you need to be verified as a social equity individual applicant. So we had a verification process open in 2019 and about 2,200 people submitted a request and over 1,600 people were verified as social equity individual applicants. We're opening up another verification period for folks that either were not verified in 2019 or want to be verified and or participate in the lottery later this year. Separate and apart from being verified as an individual social equity applicant, when you submit your application for a license, we do a review to determine whether or not the person, whether it's you as a sole proprietor, you as a partner in a business, or you as a member of an LLC, or shareholder in a corporation, whether or not that entity meets the requirements to receive a social equity license from the city. Information about the social equity program can be found in section 10420 within our code. That'll break down the individual requirements. It'll also break down the equity share requirements for the entity applying for the license. And then, of course, Dr. Brown's team has a lot more information available to social equity applicants and prospective social equity applicants, either through materials that they've put together or through our learning management system.
From Avery T, will delivery licenses be available for phase 2 applicants anytime in the next year or two?
Yes and no. So phase 2 is closed. By code, phase 2 ended back in 2018. Separate and apart from phase 2 being closed, the non-storefront delivery license type is only available to social equity applicants through 2025. So if you are a verified social equity business that participated in phase 2, you have the ability to submit an application for the non-storefront delivery license type, and it'll get processed just like any other application. If you're a general applicant, so your business doesn't meet the requirements to be considered a social equity applicant, then you're not eligible to submit a non-storefront delivery license at this time. But either way, you can't add activities to an existing record. Therefore, a new application would have to be submitted if you do want to pursue the non-storefront delivery license type.
From Edgar E, when will a new social equity verification period begin?
Well, that's an easy question. It's going to open up next or later this month.
Great.
So I was going to say stay tuned. Like, the department will be hosting another webinar that will be made public in the very near future. So stay tuned.
From Benjamin K, why can we not apply to an address that has had an illegal operation on it if the property falls under the correct zoning and distance requirements?
Under the Los Angeles Municipal Code, properties have to be compliant and eligible. So compliance with the zoning and distancing requirements is one part, and eligibility is the other part. Under section 104, it identifies why a business premises would not be eligible, and unlicensed commercial cannabis activity, a utility disconnection, or the padlocking of the property due to unlicensed commercial cannabis activity are reasons why a business premises would not be eligible, and that's set by the code.
Also from Benjamin, can the city create an exception on blighted properties that are in the green zone but are not in the correct distance setbacks from sensitive uses?
Policymakers can consider amendments to the distancing requirements and where businesses could locate, but DCR does not have unilateral discretion to basically deviate from what's articulated in section 105. So it's something that could be done, but it would take a council initiative and direction to the Department of City Planning to start to consider allowing businesses to either be located in areas that are not currently considered, or to change the distancing setbacks from sensitive uses. It's all outside of the department's control.
From Eric L. There are many problems that exist between SEIAs and current investors/partners, including investors who are unresponsive. I've been informed that an entity substitution will require pre-application review and potentially giving up the property where the license is approved at. Is this accurate? And how long does the pre-application review take?
Components of the kind of the statement are accurate. So I'll try to break it down a little bit. Folks submit an application to the department, and we, as the regulatory agency, review that application for compliance. So if there are business related issues between the social equity individual applicant and their business partners, DCR is not getting involved in those disputes. So if the parties are unable to work together and move their application forward as the entity that is listed on the application, it's going to ultimately result in the record being deemed abandoned because they don't meet the requirements for the record to be filed. If a record is deemed abandoned, under the revised municipal code, there is a new process for refiling. And if it's a social equity record and there's one qualifying social equity individual applicant listed on the record, that individual applicant has the ability to refile that application. And they may refile it as the original entity or a new entity. As part of the refiling process, everything is considered as a new record. You are submitting a new application to the department for commercial cannabis, for a commercial cannabis license, which means that we will vet the application record from the beginning, which starts with the pre-application review and determination of whether or not the proposed business location is compliant and eligible under the code. If you do submit the pre-application review, just like any other pre-application review record, you should have an eligibility determination within 30 days of the date DCR is notified that the corresponding fees have been paid. And then from there, you'll get your notice of eligibility, and you have up to 1 year to submit your temporary approval application to the department. So that's kind of what this process looks like right now.
From Brian R. Is there a summary of applicable procedures for change of ownership of a social equity license in the city of LA?
There are resources available on the department's website, and there's a section within the municipal code that outline various changes. The ownership and what the equity share requirements of a social equity individual applicant vary by phase, and how the applicant was verified and when a license was issued. For those types of changes, it's, if you're contemplating an ownership change, you need to know what phase the license was issued under, whether or not it was considered a tier 1 or a tier 2 license. And then of course, whether or not when the equity changes between owners, whether or not a social equity individual applicant will own the requisite equity for it to continue to be considered a social equity license. So those are the things that you need to think about. There's not a worksheet or any tool to kind of plug in variables to determine whether or not it may be eligible. But the information is there and available on our website.
From Wesley H. Please walk us through the city's plans to minimize the expense, delays, and uncertainty of CEQA compliance for operators who are already struggling by competing with illicit operators who don't pay taxes nor have to comply with CEQA.
So, as I mentioned on one of the prior questions, in order to go through environmental review, you have to have temporary approval. We have been awarded $22 million by the state of California to assist our local licensees in their transition to annual licensure. We've basically split that pot of money between moving applicants through the moving licensees through the environmental review process, and then for the folks that successfully get through the environmental review, providing fee waivers for annual application fees to move them through to annual licensure. To minimize the expense, we are providing fee waivers for the initial environmental review if your project qualifies for an exemption. There would not be additional environmental review fees associated with your project, your record with DCR. If you don't qualify for an exemption, then of course there will be costs associated with an initial study and whatever environmental review is tied to your project, and then you'll have to make a business decision about whether or not you want to move forward with your project. And the state basically has about a 2.5-year period for folks to continue to renew provisional licenses before they're going to be required to get an annual license. So our process is set up so that existing licensees can begin that environmental review process this year, and based on their ability to navigate through that environmental review, they may be eligible to submit their annual application later this year. And then depending on the license types will depend on how it meets the requirements to get to the final decision maker for the issuance of a license. As folks know, non-storefront delivery and non-retail licenses below 30,000 square feet are the director is the first level decision maker. And then for retail storefront licenses and non-storefront or non-retail licenses greater than 30,000 square feet, the Cannabis Regulation Commission is that first level decision maker.
From KDP, for Tier 3 applicants with existing cannabis operations who will be re-verified as a social equity applicant, formerly Tier 1 or Tier 3, during the verification window at the end of May, when will the environmental review process begin for a social equity applicant, and how long will it take in order for the applicant to be eligible to apply for an annual license?
Sorry to do this to you. Can you run the question by me one more time?
Sure. For Tier 3 applicants with existing cannabis operations who will be re-verified as a social equity applicant, formerly Tier 1 or Tier 3, during the verification window at the end of May 2022, when will the environmental review process begin for a social equity applicant, and how long will it take in order for the applicant to be eligible to apply for an annual license?
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna do a little bit of interpretation on this question. Tier 3 was a construct of phase 2. Tier 3 is a general applicant who was eligible to apply during phase 2, provided they execute a social equity agreement with the city to provide assistance to a bona fide social equity individual applicant or social equity applicant that's Tier 1 or Tier 2. So how I answer this is going to be specific to phase 2. So if you are a phase 2 Tier 3 applicant and you did not get verified under the original window, and you have somebody in your ownership group who gets verified into the new window and they meet the requirements for the record to be considered a social equity record, that will be resolved as part of the annual application process. If you have a license, so you have temporary approval, you're eligible to go through the environmental review, regardless of whether or not you're phase 2, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3. Once you get through environmental review, that's when you're going to be able to submit your annual license application. For phase 2 applicants, tier 1 and tier 2 phase 2 applicants, they never went through equity share review. The equity share review that we're doing for new applicants wasn't in place when phase 2 started and we began issuing temporary approval license. However, it is a requirement to get to a complete application. So phase 2, tier 1, tier 2 applicants will have to go through equity share review before their annual application is deemed complete. For tier 3 applicants, they're required to submit their social equity agreement with their annual application. So if you don't want to be considered tier 3 and you have a qualifying owner that has the requisite equity for it to be considered tier 1 or tier 2, the annual application process is when you're going to make that change, because once your annual application has been deemed complete, it's moving forward unmodified. So I think that's the best I can answer that question.
From Maytal M, what documents or information will be needed to show assets for social equity individual verification?
For the asset piece, there's going to be an attestation that will be made available for the process. You'll basically go through the attestation and answer the questions and then attest that the information is true and correct. DCR doesn't want copies of your financial, like, we want to be careful about what types of sensitive information we get from prospective applicants, and getting copies of your financial statements, your bank statements, things like that. That's not stuff that we as a department want to have custody for. So we're going to use the attestation as a process to collect the information we need from the applicants. Folks just have to understand that that attestation is part of this review process. And if you lie or you make a material misrepresentation on that form, and it's found out later to be a lie or a material misrepresentation, it could impact any records that are pending before the department and or any licenses that have been submitted. So.
Okay, from KDP and Anonymous, will this webinar be posted on DCR's website?
Yes. It's being recorded, and the recorded video will be archived under the event section of the website.
From Ed T, can you clarify changes that relate to social equity participants related to convictions and low income status?
So the requirements for a California cannabis arrest or conviction, those have not changed. Any conviction or arrest associated with a violation of Proposition B have never been considered a California conviction or arrest. In terms of low income, the asset attestation requirement is a new component that was adopted by mayor and council over a year ago. When we implemented the first verification window, the council had made some changes to the recommendations by the department and the consultant that put together the social equity program report. One of those changes created an opportunity for folks to get verified as a social equity applicant based on residency in a disproportionately impacted area. The original study and department recommendations were to base the DIAs on police reporting district. And, council during their deliberations felt that it may be difficult for folks to know which police reporting district their address fell into. Therefore, they changed it to zip code. And when they changed it to zip code, what happened was larger geographies were captured, and folks that, of course, were not impacted by the disproportionate arrest in a geographic area benefited from that policy change. And we saw folks that were very affluent applying to be social equity individual applicants. So prior to this most current change and the renovations, council looked for ways to kind of focus in on folks that were truly social equity individual applicants based on what they wanted the criteria to be. And one of those criteria were there are always ways to kind of write down income and or hide assets. Very affluent people do that all the time. And council wanted to put a mechanism in there to recognize that what you report to the IRS is not a true reflection of your wealth. And the asset requirement was something in there to kind of hone in on providing benefits to folks that would be considered low income from a traditional standpoint.
From Michelle D. How does someone refile an abandoned application?
If the application record has been set to abandoned-refile, there will be an action item within the DCR licensing portal next to that particular record that allows for the record to be refiled. There is a workflow that was recently posted on the department's website, and I believe that additional information will be forthcoming on that issue.
From Yelena K. Will new applicants receive the CEQA notice of substantial compliance letter once their application status is changed to local compliance underway?
Maybe. So two pieces to that one. The first piece is when the local record gets a status of local compliance underway, we'll have a new notice for local compliance underway that has the 3 categories of information that the state is looking for. And that means that their project description is under review and CEQA compliance is underway. And we'll be meeting with the state later this month to talk about the notices and make sure that the state is comfortable with the contents and meeting the requirements. But it's my understanding right now that that notice will meet the requirements for folks to progress to get their state provisional license. If it doesn't, then we'll have to contemplate issuing that same notice that we issued to licensees to applicants in order to help them navigate through the state process. So stay tuned.
From Anahi T. Is there a way to see what documents are missing for the modifications that say additional information needed?
I would recommend reaching out to your assigned analyst. Your assigned analyst has all of the detailed information that relates to your record, including what deficiencies exist on the record. So please reach out to your assigned analyst because they're best positioned to answer your specific question.
Also from Anahi T. Is there a designated department within the Department of Building and Safety to help applicants expedite their building permits?
Building and Safety has 1 or 2 positions that are intended to assist DCR applicants and licensees navigate through the building and safety process. I would recommend reaching out to your assigned analyst so that they can connect you with the unit within DBS that is intended to expedite it so that they can reach out directly to you and put you and basically help you navigate through their process. It's one of those things where if we communicate to them that you are in our process and where you are in our process, and they know that you have something pending before building and safety, they can make the necessary connections within their department to help your permit or application in building and safety move through at an expedited rate.
From Levon E. If you are a top 200 applicant, will phase 3 retail round 1 ineligible applicants get a second chance to refile?
I'm going to interpret this question also. So like if you were included in phase 3 retail round 1 and you were eligible to submit an application and you paid your temporary approval application fees and later your temporary approval application is deemed abandoned, then you would be afforded the opportunity to refile. If you never submitted your temporary approval application, you never paid your temporary approval application fees, there was nothing ever before DCR, you don't get an opportunity to refile because there was never an application before us in the first place.
Okay, a question from Deirdre H. If I'm already considered a social equity applicant with an ADA number, would I have to go through the SCIA eligibility process opening this month of May?
It depends. So if you were verified under the original criteria and you already have records before the department and you're not planning to apply for any other activities, then you wouldn't have to go through the new verification process because you've already been verified. That verification applies to the existing records before the department. However, if you plan to participate in the lottery and register for the lottery, you will have to get verified under the new process. And verification under the updated criteria may be necessary in the future to submit a new application for commercial cannabis license activities.
Also from Deirdre H. I'm interested in applying for a distribution license. Is this type available now?
The distribution and distribution transport only license types are open right now, and DCR is accepting applications from general applicants and social equity applicants for those two. You don't have to be verified as a social equity individual applicant to submit an application for the distribution activity.
From Letitia W. How do you know if your community plan area is full?
On DCR's website, we've historically published the community plan areas that have reached undue concentration for the retail storefront activity. And then, of course, that will be expanded to include cultivation within the next 3 months.
From Rick, after 200 licenses are given and you are not chosen for retail, will there be another round for retail?
So phase 3 retail round 1 is closed. DCR has already accepted the applications for that process. Whatever licenses are not issued through round 1 carry forward to round 2 and any future rounds that DCR administers. All future application slots are going to go through a lottery process. So we're going through the verification process that will open later this month. That's a prerequisite for DCR to administer the lottery to select folks to participate in phase 3 retail round 2. So any new retail storefront application slots will be identified via the lottery that we hope to administer later this year.
What are the new requirements to verify for social equity, and how many of the requirements do you have to match to be verified?
You have to meet 2 out of the 3 criteria in order to be verified as a social equity individual applicant. And there are, depending on the phase and the license type, there may be additional requirements for what criteria you get verified under to qualify you to apply for different activities. I would refer folks to the municipal code and then materials that will be rolled out later this month to kind of provide a breakdown of those requirements.
Okay, and the last question, I am a phase 1 and 2 social equity verified, and I have investors. Are there still opportunities for me, or do I need to apply again under the new rules for retail?
If you've been verified, but you don't have a retail storefront application before the department and you intend to participate in the lottery, you have to get verified under the revised criteria. And that process will open up later this month. If you do not get verified under the revised criteria, you will not be eligible to participate in the lottery. I think with that, we're out of time. So I just want to thank everybody for joining today. We hope to see you at the next Q&A on June 2nd at noon. Again, this is going to be a monthly event that will take place during my, in air quotes, lunch hour, because I don't really get a lunch hour. This will not be the only opportunity for folks to participate in these Q&A sessions. You know, as I mentioned, it's our intent to do this on a monthly basis. Again, the next one will happen on Thursday, June 2nd. We do give priority to folks that RSVP and submit questions in advance. As folks saw today, we get a lot of questions. So please RSVP and submit questions because we didn't get to the Zoom questions today. So we'll have to roll those forward to the next one. Again, it was recorded today. It's going to be archived under the events section on our website. And we hope to have it either posted later today or sometime tomorrow. With that, I want to thank everybody and have a great day.